Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Gemba 360 special legal compliance webinar specifically focused on the COVID-19 rules and what you need to know about. Certainly, over the last week, we have seen quite a dramatic shift, certainly in Victoria, but also across other states and territories. Queensland is opening up its restrictions and some of its borders to other states. New South Wales is doing something slightly different. We're seeing changes in South Australia and equally changes in WA and Tasmania as well too. So it's not surprising that the COVID-19 rules are varied right across the country. At this time down in Victoria, there is also a growing concern about a second wave, and we are starting to see in news reports as of last night some of this being spread across New South Wales and other states as well too. So there is the need to maintain your COVID safe plan that you do have. It's not something that is going to go away very quickly. Some of the reports are even saying that immunizations and vaccines may only be available around December 2021. So businesses are left to effectively try and address a lot of the challenges that we are currently seeing. Equally, there are responsibilities on employees as well too, and it becomes even more challenging for agencies that are on border towns as well too. There are a number of companies joining us that sit, for example, on the Victorian border, but also staff and some services that they may access may and do actually sit on the New South Wales border. Equally, we are finding that in Queensland and New South Wales and also in other parts like South Australia and WA as well too. So that said, what we have come up with is a legal compliance guide to really assist agencies like yourselves, and we will be circulating this out to all attendees that have joined us. In saying that, just some other introductory comments around this is that firstly, there are rules that employers still have. There are employee obligations that you need to be aware of as well too. There are also ongoing rules for tenancies and evictions as well. If you remember a few months ago, there was a change to or introduction and a change to the tenancies code of conduct for residential and commercial sites as well too, and that is still ongoing because there was a six-month moratorium as well too. So what we're seeing is effectively as a change in the rules around the country, and for agencies that work across borders, this is equally posing an even greater challenge as well too, because some parts of the agency may well be in lockdown. There are some agencies, parts of the agency that may be free to move around and do some of the, I'm going to say, normal things in life. So what we have looked at putting together is bringing together a range of reference materials to put together a legal compliance guide. This legal compliance guide will obviously change over time, and it's something that we will revisit as well. What we're looking at here is what employers should be doing, what employees should be doing as well too. So obligations around things like work, health and safety obligations, and also knowing what the rules are. Because if, as an employee, you may travel interstate, whether it be during these school holidays, for example, or even in the future, actually there are responsibilities that you may need to know about. And if you are traveling interstate, be across what obligations there are for people residing in those states and also visitors. We will also cover off some key case examples as well too around some of the rules and how these actually vary as well too. As always, we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available to attendees as well too and circulate this around. As part of this, we will record this all the way up to the question and answer part of the webinar, where we do switch off the recording and we'll stay on the line and answer any questions that people have. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, by all means, please post these into the questions panel and I'll look to get to those as we go through the presentation. So what is effectively covered? In the order that we're looking at, firstly, we're going to look at the fines that you should know about. Obviously, there are parts of this that you need to know and be across, especially because these are varied across different states and territories now as well too. Also, what the company and employer obligations are and what the employee obligations are. Also, we'll cover off the COVID safe dashboard as well too that many agencies are using, that we have supplied to agencies like yourselves around this. And this will also include the legal compliance guide that we're going through today, which will really allow people to search for questions that they might have rather than trying to find things all over the internet and the likes. We're going to cover off the general rules that you should know about, and as I mentioned, open up for any questions and answers and general discussion at the end of the session as well. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners. So firstly, let's have a look at some of the fines around these COVID-19 rules that we have come across. Firstly, we're going to divide these sections up, and I'm going to talk broadly as we go through each of the slides, and this material will also be circulated around to you. So with that, if there are any questions coming out of it, even after the webinar, you can always come back to us on this. So firstly, in Victoria, under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, there are fines that can be imposed for people not complying with directions. And for individuals, this includes up to $1,652, and for businesses, $9,913. There are larger fines where they can be issued through the courts as well too. What is actually confusing for most people at the moment around some of the Victorian fines is that there seems to be quite a broad discrepancy that is occurring, whereby there was a protest yesterday reported on the news, for example, involving union officials, whereby it wasn't, no people were reportedly fined, but effectively people leaving hotspots or entering hotspots could well be fined. So with it, there is seemingly this quite varied approach in Victoria in terms of people being issued fines. Nevertheless, we're not going to get into the politics of the individual fines themselves, but actually provide some of the core compliance requirements that you and your agency needs to be aware of. Some more around looking at the legal risks for non-compliance as opposed to the political discussions around what may and may not be within the police discretion. In New South Wales, in the past, there has been fines of up to $11,000 and also up to 6 months jail for people who break the rules. In the last few days, there has been greater emphasis between Victoria and New South Wales in terms of people travelling or found to be travelling from hotspots within Victoria and entering New South Wales. So where that may come into it is that those in Victorian hotspots may face 6 months jail and up to $11,000 if they enter Victoria. Equally, in Queensland, officers have had the power for some time to issue on-the-spot fines of $1,334.50 for individuals and just over $6,000 for corporations who breach chief health officer directions as well. With this, obviously, as there are restrictions being eased across different states and territories, still these fines are kept in place, and it's important that you be aware of what fines are still capable of being issued to ensure that you don't breach your current rules around this. In terms of who decides if I'm breaking the laws, generally enforcement will be left up to the discretion of police officers in various states and territories. States certainly have expressed different approaches. For example, the ACT says it will be issuing a warning in the first instance, while obviously in Victoria, it has adopted a much more stricter approach, particularly now as we're seeing the second, what's being described by many people as the second wave coming through, and they're trying to get that under control. In terms of challenging fines, whether you're an individual or your agency, not all states have specified how this is to occur. However, as a result of the police issuing fines, then you may well need to go through the court process. This at times is actually much more time consuming and considerably expensive as well too, considering the process and trying to get it listed within the courts itself. Now, there are clearly different rules across Australia, and what we are suggesting out of this webinar is to ensure that your COVID safe plan includes some of these rules, includes some of these reference guides as well too, so that you and your staff across your agency can have quick access to ready information as well. Quite simply, there is a myriad and a large amount of documents. These are just some of these that are listed here. What we have done in putting this session together is to look at the legislation, is to look at the policy documents coming out of the Commonwealth and coming out of the various states and territories, and also looking at the relevant state and territory pandemic plans, whether it be in Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, WA, and South Australia, to look at putting this material together. That said, we equally acknowledge that some of the slides and information comes from also a lot of the media sources as well too. We are compiling a lot of this information across from the news outlets as well too, in order to provide a concise set of slides that yourselves can actually use, whether that be ABC, Channel 9, Channel 7 across the country, and also newspapers like The Age and The Guardian as well too, that we have compiled this information from. That said, the information that's coming to you has been also referenced back to relevant legislation and compliance documentation. For example, the AHPPC, which is the Health Advisory Committee to the Commonwealth Government, and also Safe Work around the checklist that will also reference and show you shortly as well. As part of this information gathering exercise as well too, and putting this legal compliance guide together, some of the language used, we've taken out all the legal jargon to actually assist you and your agency just have some of the ready answered questions available and ready to use as well too. So first of all, what should employers do to reduce the risk of COVID-19? Now, we've actually used this slide in a number of sessions across our webinars that we've run over the past number of months now. And as restrictions start to ease across different states and territories, across Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, WA, and even Northern Territory just received its first case in a number of months yesterday. There are still a number of very clear, 14 in total, items that employers need to mark off. And this effectively will carry through all the way through your COVID safe plan, steps 1, if you're based in Victoria, but also part 2 and part 3 being based in other states like Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, WA, etc. So with it, effectively, employers should have policies and procedures and technology to support employees to work from home if possible. Employees are supported to work from home where required, and effectively managing still the social distancing and staggering working hours, and also trying to ensure 4 square meters per person and 1.5 meters between people wherever possible. You will find that these 14 different items will actually carry through all of the different rules that I'm going to show you today. Even things like discouraging carpooling between employees to and from work, and continuing to promote good hygiene by providing hand washing facilities and alcohol-based or alcohol-based hand sanitizer and appropriate waste receptacles, as well as ensuring that you undertake frequent cleaning, holding only essential meetings, modifying rosters, avoiding non-essential travel. All these items effectively still apply, even down to looking at continuing to train staff around respiratory hygiene and social distancing, educating team and staff about early signs of symptoms of COVID-19 and the need to stay home if unwell, and also looking at supporting employees to adhere to official advice about how to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. So a lot of these 14 items will continue as we move through the various COVID safe plan steps. And these effectively still apply across the rules. So when we look at employee obligations, effectively the Safe Work Australia guidelines still apply as we continue to move through stages 2 and 3, or in Queensland and New South Wales, for example, but also importantly, if you're in lockdown in some of the Melbourne hotspots, then still this still applies. It's just around what rules effectively are, I'm going to say, governing what people need to do. With that, there is also the clear use around ensuring that within your COVID safe plan and your agency rules, that you still have some of the systems in place to support what you are doing. And many agencies joining us still have this. They'll have their own COVID-19 daily assessment form. They'll have the working approval, the workstation registers, cleaning registers, as well as other service actions and compliance registers as well. Now, what this is allowing staff to effectively do is manage and meet their work, health, and safety obligations, and also continue to update your COVID safe plan. So it's really around taking a structured approach and to ensure that you continue to meet some of your work health, well, not some, but your key work health and safety obligations. The COVID Safe dashboard, which many of you have seen already and you're using around this, is effectively this dashboard here. And effectively what it allows you to do is take the COVID Safe plan, and we've implemented these key requirements as well as this legal compliance guide into the COVID Safe plan. So people can actually go in and search for questions and commonly asked questions that they might have. As this is changing, then effectively what you will find is that the legal compliance guide will also be updated, and we'll be sending a hard copy around for agencies to utilize as well. As part of that, let's have a look at some of the COVID-19 rules and the commonly asked questions. First of all, covering off the hotspot that we need to look at. And this is only a few slides that we've got for each question, but it really provides the summary information of what you need to know about. So effectively on the 30th of June, we found that massive parts of Melbourne had to go back into level 3 restrictions. This was found after following a massive surge in the coronavirus cases. So effectively this is continuing all the way through until July the 29th, at least. And there have been 4 reasons that people in these areas can leave their house, whether it be for work or school, for caregiving or care, for daily exercise, and for food and other essentials. and people in these areas cannot leave their postcode except for work. Likewise, you can only travel into these areas for work you have to do in person or to provide or receive care. So that also means for people that may have family and friends that actually reside in these hotspots coming from Queensland or New South Wales or any other state, effectively you cannot travel into the postcodes unless you have to do so for work or to provide or receive care directly around this. It also means that businesses in these areas that have been able to reopen, for example, beauty parlors, gyms, libraries, and swimming pools, have been closed again, and cafes and restaurants will only be allowed to open for takeaway and delivery. The exception around this is essential service agencies. So where it is around community health services, health and well-being, around the health space, as well as aged care facilities as well too, can continue to operate. But this is where it's important that those agencies actually have their COVID safe plan in full operation in terms of managing those services and also staff that you have. Now, the other part around this was that there are some agencies that provide tenancies and other residential housing services as well too. Now, a few months ago, there was a moratorium on evictions, which was set down for the next 6 months. So we're still actually, even though restrictions are being lifted, we're still within this past 6 months phase. So that means that some residentials and commercial tenants who are experiencing financial distress due to the impact of the coronavirus can effectively apply for exemptions under this code of conduct. And it is something that your agency should still be aware about. Now, some of the really fundamental questions around this, which we are seeing a significant degree of variation, is around some of the questions I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about these in relation to more broadly as we go through these slides, some of the changes that we're seeing in different states and territories. Now, this actually applies for agencies that have joined us, not only for after hours, after work, but also in terms of the services that your agencies might be providing. Within this, some of the questions were like, how many people can I have over at my house? Now, in Victoria, you can have up to 5 guests in your home, reduced to total in-home gathering size of 20, but that actually is changed depending on whether you're in your hotspot or not. In Queensland and New South Wales, up to 20 adults is allowed. The state government has tentatively announced, for example, in Queensland, from the 10th of July, from tomorrow, being the 10th of July, up to 100 people may be allowed to gather in your home, for those of you that have homes big enough to accommodate 100 guests. Equally, there is changes in New South Wales. So where this gets slightly, again, confusing is where people may live close to border towns, and I'll use the example of Shepparton, Albury, Wodonga area as a corridor in Victoria's north, where effectively in Victoria you may only have 5 guests, but potentially if you're not from the hotspot of Victoria, then you may cross the border if you're allowed to do so, and then effectively have a much greater number of people in somebody else's house. So it does become quite confusing around this. It's equally important that if you're traveling from New South Wales back into Victoria, then you may well need to keep in mind the number of guests that you should be having within the house itself. Equally, there are also a number of variations across Tasmania, Western Australia and South Australia, which is also changing as well. Equally, what we're finding is that the rules of social distancing, the 1.5 meters, still applies in all of these cases as well too, where the social distancing rules that I showed you at the start still apply. Now, the other important part that we look at is how many people can gather outside. Now, this is important for service agencies where you may be providing religious services, you may be providing group services as part of the agency service that you support. And again, what we're finding is significant variations across each state and territory. In New South Wales, for example, you can have public gatherings from the 1st of July of up to 20 people. But what we're finding is that the condition around that is that associations, for example, must have their COVID safe plan in place. Equally, when you look at Victoria, it's only up to 10 people can gather outside. But again, this is different in every other area that doesn't have a stage 3 lockdown. In Queensland and Tasmania, we're finding that it's slightly different again too, and the rules are listed here. And we're finding the same thing up in Western Australia and South Australia, where there is literally no limit on the number of people allowed, as long as there is no more than one person per 2 square meters. So as part of this, every time that you look at doing something, there are rules and regulations that you need to be across. And often what we're finding is that the social distancing rules of 1.5 meters is still being applied across every single rule that we're actually seeing as well too. Now, importantly, is around the visiting in an aged care or residential care facility. Wherever you are across the country, in every state, all visitors must have received this year's flu vaccination unless they have a documented medical contradiction to receiving the vaccine, or visitors cannot enter an aged care facility if they have recently been overseas and been in recent contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19 or are feeling unwell. So what is important here is that if you're running aged care or residential facilities, you should be looking at screening every person that's actually coming in. We know a lot of people are actually only taking visitors by bookings, and effectively people are actually doing pre-screenings before people actually come in. Some agencies have been quite proactive and actually sending out either newsletters or SMSs or the likes to inform visitors of what their individual obligations are, and informing them that if they have if they cannot meet these criteria, then effectively they will be turned away. And effectively it is, you are able to make that decision specifically if people are not meeting all of these criteria. So in saying that, again, there are some variations across all the states and territories. New South Wales Health does provide guidelines on residential aged care facilities. Victoria, on the other hand, has limited it, can have up to 2 visits each, or persons can have up to 2 visits each day for a maximum of 2 hours, and the 2 visitors can go together or in separate visits that total 2 hours. So there is a slight variation there. Those under the age of 16 can only visit if the resident is receiving end-of-life care or if they are in the company of an adult. There are also other variations across Queensland and Tasmania as well. Tasmania actually brought its restrictions in on the 22nd of June, while Western Australia have effectively said that they can only have one visit, one care and support visit each day. So again, you see that there are variations that we are seeing across the different states and territories. South Australia and Northern Territory and ACT, again, have had quite consistent approaches that we've seen in other states and territories as well. Now, some of the other changes that we're equally seeing is around restaurants, cafes, and pubs. Now, equally, there are many agencies that provide some sort of food handling services that have joined us today, or where they may lease out space to other companies that provides these types of services. And in this case, what is important, and this has been raised, you can have a look at what we've come through as I'm talking over what some of the challenges that agencies have asked us, even in more recently in the past week, is whose rules do these agencies need to follow, or companies need to follow? Are they in fact covered by your COVID safe plan? And what we're finding is, whether you're in New South Wales, or you can see the Victorian ones here, that if you're sharing space with another service provider, then it's not that the rules don't apply. They have to follow these particular rules that we are seeing here. Registers still do need to be kept of people that are attending restaurants, cafes, or pubs. And the square distancing rules, you can see Tasmania's here, or even across Western Australia, to effectively maintain certain registers. There is no requirement in WA for businesses to maintain a patron register. However, in saying that, some of our advice to companies is that it is prudent for yourselves to maintain patron registers, whether you're coming into an aged care facility, whether you're coming into restaurants, cafes, or pubs, because COVID-19 is going to be with us for some time. And if there is a outbreak and you need to monitor it yourselves for who has actually been affected, then again, there are specific requirements that you may need to follow, and also to ensure that you've met your work health and safety obligations as well. So what we have looked at is, and you can see that even the Northern Territory, even though they have had very, very low numbers, with the exception of one yesterday being reported through the media, was that all businesses, even in the Northern Territory, are allowed to reopen as long as they have a COVID-19 plan in place. And you'll find that each state and territory keeps on referring back to the COVID safe plan that agencies should be having. And in saying that, it is incredibly important that your agency have and monitor their COVID safe plan to ensure that you're actually meeting and continuing to meet your specific requirements that you have for this as well too. So within it, what we are seeing is there is this importance of having this COVID safe plan across your agencies and needs of what you're actually doing as well. So the other question that people have asked us is, how far can I travel on holiday within the states? Now, effectively, there is no restrictions except in Victoria in terms of how far you can travel, with the exception of level 3 lockdowns in Victoria at the moment. Effectively, the general rule is that there are no restrictions even across WA for recreational activities, but effectively it is important that you be aware of what the activities that you can do. The other part that people turn around and ask us is, can I holiday in another state? Effectively what we are seeing is that firstly, travel, it used to be that you had to go into quarantine and isolation for 2 weeks where traveling between states. So effectively, what we are seeing in New South Wales is that residents are allowed to leave New South Wales and visitors don't need to quarantine since 1st of June. However, this has now changed with Victoria being required that anyone coming from a hotspot is required to effectively isolate, will not be allowed to enter New South Wales and can effectively be fined. Equally, what we're also finding is that in Queensland, there is no entry into Queensland is prohibited unless you have been applied for, been granted an exception. But Queensland is effectively set to open its borders from the 10th of July, as long as case numbers remain low. And that's effectively, as we're going into tomorrow, the position that they are taking. Equally, Tasmania, all non-essential travellers to Tasmania, including returning residents, must quarantine for 14 days. They have actually closed its borders to Victoria And the same thing with Western Australia and South Australia has effectively closed its borders across to Victoria. At the moment, South Australia is allowing for people to from Queensland, WA, Northern Territory, and Tasmania can enter South Australia without having to quarantine for 14 days. But essentially, people still from New South Wales and Victoria will have to until the 20th of July. So with it, there are considerable variations around this, and especially if you are traveling for business or non-essential work, you should be considering these particular guidelines and rules when making travel arrangements as well. Now, fortunately, the other issue that arises is during how many people can actually attend funerals or even weddings as well. And there are a range of rules that currently apply across the different states and territories. With it, this has been one of the most significant variations that we've found, certainly across the country, and it is something that we need to carefully consider with this. And you can see that again, we've covered off each of the states and territories around this. And again, it is something to be mindful of, especially when I say, unfortunately, working in the aged care space. These will vary over time for agencies that effectively provide multiple service sites across the country. You will find that these do vary across different states, and policies should equally be there to reflect these as well too. So with that, we've also included around church and religious ceremonies as well too. We've got a large number of religious groups joining us from around the country today. And again, what we're finding is that there is significant variation. While in New South Wales, up to 50 people can attend, though the Chief Health Officer has urged congregations to reconsider activities that might spread the virus, like singing and passing around collection baskets as well too. And again, this 4 square metre rule applies for these in New South Wales. Equally, in Victoria, there is the 4 square metre rule that applies. It is only up to 20 people compared to Tasmania, which allows up to 250 people as well too. So again, there is variation, and while I'd probably suggest that there's major variations in terms of the square footage rules. I mentioned 4 square metres, whereas in Western Australia and South Australia, it's 2 square metres. Now, part of this is that with ACTs, you can see here, has up to 4 square metres. So, but what we're looking at doing, and why we've kind of said, look, keep it to the 4 square metre rules around this, is that we've gone back to the safe work guidelines for working with safe work environments. So within it, while there may be under rules the ability to narrow that space down, what we have suggested to agencies is try and keep it to that 4 square metre, 1 person per 4 square metres, and 1.5 metre distance for social distancing, because this way you're actually keeping up to date with the safe work procedures. One of the big pressure points has also been around schools as well too. And again, there are a range of issues with schools. We're finding recently that there's been a higher rate of community transitions being found in some schools as well too, and some schools closed. But in saying that, schools are all set to reopen, but where we're sitting at the moment is that this may well change as well. With that, people have also said, can we effectively shop for clothes and non-essential items? Again, the exception is yes to everyone except, and the exception is to everyone except Victoria, where you're only supposed to shop for necessary goods and services. With it, under salons, spas, and beauty services, again, where you look at agencies that provide support services to the community and staff as well too that provide services. every group, every state has asked for companies to have their COVID safe plan in place, and there are specific rules that you need to follow across each of these areas as well too. In terms of cinemas, entertainment values, community hubs, museums and libraries, again, this idea of this community COVID safe plan is required by all states and territories. But the difference is that they have lifted in most states and territories specific areas and numbers that people can attend. Don't confuse this with other service areas. So for example, just because we're finding in cinemas, entertainment venues, museums and libraries that these rules then apply to areas like aged care or the likes, that simply is not the case. With it, you'll find that there are really specific rules that you need to be careful and you need to follow as part of this whole process. And it is something that you need to be careful in terms of where you are actually going and the services that your agency runs. Within it, what you will find equally is that these vary across the different states, and also it varies across gyms and what else you can do for exercise. Now, a lot of agencies that are joining us do provide some sort of community service or exercise for health and well-being for their clients or services. And again, with this, your policies for your specific agencies need to be compliant with these different rules. And for example, in New South Wales, gyms, fitness centres and studios are allowed to open for up to 10 people. Whereas in Victoria, gyms, yoga studios, fitness classes and indoor personal training are prohibited. So it's important that you be aware of the differences across this, especially if your agency provides multiple community-based services across the country. So with it, what our recommendations have been is that you look at these rules that we've circulated around, especially where you provide multiple services to clients across the country as well too, or multiple sites as well too. It's important that you carefully consider each of these rules and requirements. With it, it's important that staff and clients be informed about what their rules and responsibilities are for your agency. With it, you may want to use the legal compliance guide as a reference point where staff can actually search through and get some of the quick answers around these. It's important that you look at your employer roles and responsibilities. And it's also important that you have your COVID safe plan in place as rules change. And this is something that's important to be aware about. No doubt rules will change. We've seen, for example, even in New South Wales, where there was a case of 50 people linked to one person in a Woolworths store. And so things can rapidly change and restrictions be imposed as soon as COVID-19 outbreaks, if they do continue to occur. So it's important that you do have your COVID safe plan in place in the event that rules change. If they don't and they continue to loosen, then equally to be able to manage your own business, it's important that that COVID safe plan be in place as well. So if there are any questions, we will open up the phone lines and more than happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. With that, we will pause the recordings, and only to say that if you do have any questions after this webinar, by all means, please contact us on 1300 360 360, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com. Thank you for your time.